Hello and welcome to the Junkyard Love Podcast.
What age do we learn how to have better conversations? At what age do we learn to have better conversations with ourselves?
Well, Julie, thanks so much for joining me. Welcome to the Junkyard Love Podcast. I'm happy you're here. I would love to start with the basics. I would love to just hear kind of a bio from you. So people who haven't heard of you, they haven't read any of your work, they haven't listened to your podcast, they're unfamiliar with who you are. I would love to kind of give them a little bit of a background to start with. So here's the most difficult question ever. Who are you?
Oh, what a question. First of all, thank you for inviting me. I'm really honored to be here. It's going to be fun. I always struggle with that question about who am I, because I had, you may be aware, and I've written about and spoken about a radical awakening I had way, way back in 1989. And when you have a shift of consciousness, of course, what happens is you wake up to the recognition that you're not your story. And you begin to see your life and your story from a more expansive perspective. You see it from the place of the I am, or the supreme self, or source itself, or whatever you want to call it. So all of that said, in terms of the small I or the personal story, I am, I guess, a spiritual coach is the best way of putting it. And following the radical awakening, I was directed to write books to support people who are also going through kundalini awakenings and recognizing who they are. And then I was told to start creating content and courses and programs. And so essentially that's what I've been doing since around 2007, something like that. And I also run intuitive art programs and courses for people that want to connect in with the self via creating artwork. So, and I also have a YouTube channel as well called Talking True, where I invite guests to speak about their radical awakenings or mystical experiences, and just dive into these topics and themes that really move beyond the story, the small story, so to speak, and into the vastness, the truth of who we are.
Yeah, wonderful. There's so much exciting stuff to unpack in there. So, I think what I would love to start with is your lucid dream. You said it was 89 that this happened to you. Can you describe a little bit of your mindset before this happened to you, and then kind of what your experience in life was afterwards, including the experience itself? I would love to know the juicy details of what actually happened in this lucid dream.
Yeah, so just to create context, because I think this is important. I was a lucid dreamer from literally, I think, the moment I came out of my mother's womb. I would have these out-of-body experiences and lucid dreams. And for those that might not know, a lucid dream is when you wake up in the dream and you realize this is a dream and I am dreaming. So you are watching the dream from the state of the witness. And what would happen is, as soon as I'd wake up in the dream, then sometimes I'd be catapulted into another realm of existence, and I'd meet great beings or angelic beings, or family members who'd just recently passed, or people who'd passed and I had never met before, and they give me messages and so on and so forth. So that had been pretty much my whole life. And I had always felt a discontent. I was always looking for someone. Ever since I was really young, I was looking for someone who I knew could speak to the truth of who I was beyond the story. I couldn't have described it that way as a kid, obviously, but that was what was happening. And in 1918, so I was very familiar with lucid dreams and all of those things and out-of-body experiences. And then in 1989, my husband Tony and I had been living in the Bahamas for 8 or 9 years, living the life, the dream life. And still there was this discontent. And I had a back problem. And somebody said, if you learn to meditate, that might help. because it will help you deal with stress. And because I'd always wanted to learn how to meditate, I thought, yeah, this is a great idea. Let me go along and, see if I can try meditating. So I think I went 2 or 3 times and it was just horrible. I mean, I felt like a real failure. I just couldn't, I'd close my eyes and try, and my mind was going crazy, and I just could not sit still and meditate for the life of me. And so I'd look around the room, open my eyes, look around the room and think, how do they do it? How can they sit so still? And so anyway, that happened, 2 or 3 times. And then after the 3rd time, I thought to myself, the people here are really nice. They're great, professional people, which was important to me. But I just can't meditate and I won't come back. And then what happened was I went home, and that night I woke up in a dream and, recognize this is a dream and I'm dreaming. And I was in a setting that was like India. Even though I'd never been to India, I recognized the environment immediately. And I was walking up a hill in this rural kind of place. And there was a little low 1-level structure on the top of the hill, very simple structure. And I was walking with a group of people, and we were carrying yoga mats under our arms. And we walked in the back of the hall. And as soon as I entered into this space, I saw a yogi sitting cross-legged on a low wooden tucket at the front of the hall. He had his eyes closed. He was wearing a white loincloth. He had a massive belly. And I recognized him immediately as being the one I had been searching for my entire life. And in that moment of recognition, it was like everything fell away. All that seeking energy, the frustration energy, the discontent energy just completely vanished. And I just felt this profound feeling of coming home and recognition. Anyway, this woman who was with me said, unroll your mat, lay on the floor, and repeat the mantra, Om Namah Shivaya. So Om is the primordial sound. Namah means I bow to, and Shiva is Lord Shiva, or Supreme Consciousness itself. So with the repetition of that mantra, you're actually saying, I bow to the Lord within me, or I bow to the truth of Supreme Consciousness, which is who and what I am. So I lay down on the floor, I closed my eyes. Within one repetition, silent repetition of Om Namah Shivaya, I felt a tap on the top of my head, and this incredibly profound energy began pouring through the crown and into my body and into every single cell. And I could literally feel this energy circulating in every cell of my body. And it was getting more and more and more intense, to the point, and it was just felt like I was going to burst into flames or something. And so I kept holding on to the mantra, repeating the mantra. My body floated up off the ground. And then after a while, when I felt I couldn't hold it anymore, I suddenly felt myself falling through time and space, and my subtle body landed through the heart chakra into my physical body. And then I hadn't been breathing, and so I sat up in bed and went, made this cute sound. And my husband woke up, Anthony woke up, and he said, what happened? And I said, I don't know, but my life will never be the same again. And that proved true. That was a prophetic response, because it absolutely proved true. The most incredible things began to happen. And again, for context, I was raised in the UK in a working class family. My father was a Catholic. My mother was an agnostic on a good day and an atheist on a bad day. And so I had absolutely no context for any of this. I did not understand any of what this meant. I had no background, nothing to relate to. And I found out later that what I'd been given was shaktipat diksha, which is the transmission. It's the transmission of the awakening power from a great being. I found out the name of the great being was Bhagavan Nityananda of Ganeshpuri, and he was renowned in India for giving shaktipat. and for appearing, bilocating and appearing in different places at the same time. And he had actually taken Mahasamadhi. He'd left his body, I think in the mid-60s, something like that, when I was, very, 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 very young. And yet here he was appearing to me, and I recognized him. And from that touch, then, from that point on, my life really was never the same again, because even though I'd always been a lucid dreamer and I'd also had psychic phenomenon, around me all the time, it was like the floodgates opened, the whole thing blew up. And so I would be having the most incredible lucid dreams and initiations from other great beings, from diverse paths, faiths, and traditions, from angels, from Lord Jesus, Mother Mary. The list goes on and on and on. And it was literally like, the way I explain it, it was like Bhagavan Nityananda, through his awakening power, invited all the great beings that he knew, into my space. And so, I'd get these profound teachings also from Sufi masters that I'd never studied or heard about. One of whom was Mrs. Irina Tweedy, who's she wrote the amazing book, what's it called? The Fire. So I forget, it'll come to me anyway. She's written books about her time in India with a Sufi master, and also I had dreams with Llewellyn Bournley. And so this just continued on for many, many, many years, and it still does. And and so everything about my life changed in ways that I could, have never anticipated years ago. For example, me hosting a YouTube channel, I was always very shy, contemplative, kind of mystical in nature, and I'm doing this work that I never anticipated writing books or creating content, and yet here we are.
Yeah. Well, I think, like many others, I'm grateful that you have found this place to communicate your experiences from such a level-headed perspective. I feel I've listening to you have conversations with other people. We all know this stuff can get so strange. It can get so, airy to talk about, and it's difficult to ground it in a sense, kind of bring it back down to earth and go, what are you really talking about here? But I feel like you have, from what I've absorbed of your content, you've really found a way to bring such a great presence to it. I'm sure that wasn't quote unquote overnight. What have been like I just imagine this experience happened to you, this insane lucid dream, and then a repetition of more lucid dreams. What does the next day look like for you? Like if you have to go to work and you have to pay the bills and do these things, how did you kind of balance out these insane, perception changing experiences with, doing the dishes?
Yes.
How do you make right action out of this?
Yeah. And that's a really great point. But what happened was, let me speak to directly what happened directly afterwards. So, when I came into my body, it was 3 a.m. and I just couldn't sleep because I was filled with the most incredible energy. So, I go into the kitchen, I start cleaning and, emptying out cupboards and doing all these crazy kind of deep, almost like spring cleaning kind of stuff. And then, it came time for me to go to work. So I hop in the car and start driving to work. And all of a sudden I had to pull over because I was just sobbing my heart out. I couldn't control, my chest was heaving and I was just sobbing my heart out. And I had to, pull over and collect myself. And then I start driving again, and then I'd be laughing hysterically. And I've always been a teacher. I still am. I teach high school. I teach art and design. And that morning of that, after Shaktipat awakening, there I was, heading to school and dealing with a grade 10 class of boys, primarily boys, who used to run to the art class because they used to love coming to art. And the first thing one of them said to me was, "Miss Hoyle, you need a new pair of shoes, And I said, you're right, I really do. I just haven't had time to get some. And he said, "Oh, there's a shoe sale on at Mike's shoe store." And so I heard the same message 2 or 3 times that day. And then I thought, I have to listen to this message. And I went to the shoe store and there was nothing there. But I realized there was a Unity bookstore across the way. And I went in there and then looking for some books to try and sort of define and describe what had happened to me. Because I knew it was profound, but I'd never heard of anything like it. And then I heard this voice behind me saying, "Oh, hi, Julie." And when I turned around, it was a woman from the dream the night before. And she said that she had not been in that bookstore for 10 years or more, but she got a message that morning to come to the bookstore. And so that I'm referencing that because that is what started to happen. So there's all of that happening in the background and in the foreground in terms of directives, messages, people showing up, things happening, and all of those things. And at the same time, there I was doing my day job, very grounded, having to deal with everything to do with school, working in very difficult conditions. I was working under a metal roof, no AC, I didn't even have fans that were working with, not many supplies, art supplies, and just making the best of it. But what would happen is I was doing a lot of mantra repetition in that space. It's silent repetition of the mantra because I was hearing it inside myself. It took this kind of life of its own. So it was like I was listening to the music of it, playing itself out and repeating itself in every cell of my being. And again, for context, I worked in a government school, which was primarily feeds the local community, most of whom were born again Christians or Baptists or Seventh-day Adventists. They were coming from Christian perspectives. So I could never have used the language of yoga and the Shakti and energy and the chakras and all of those things. So I learned to use language that was accessible to the students and the staff. So I'd speak about Jesus. Jesus told me to tell you. If it came up, obviously I wouldn't proselytize. That's not my business. But I would use that language. And the thing as well is, without me saying anything, I saw evidence of this awakened power and energy in the room because I'd have these, big grade 10, 11, 12 students coming in, a lot of them boys. And they'd come to my desk and go like this, at lunchtime, Miss Hoyle, can I stay in the room because my spirit feels very happy here. Or it's nice and quiet in here. Another time a boy was cleaning a board. He had a wet cloth. I'd asked him to help me put up a display. He was cleaning a board and he was going, and that's so far outside of his kind of lexicon in terms of his language. And I knew that there was this transmission that was happening and it was so far beyond the mind. But I just kept seeing evidence of it and hearing evidence of it from what the students were saying about how they felt inside that space. And also in terms of their artwork, because I'd see visual images of the awakening power. And I still do. I work now in an international school. So there's more of a mix in terms of where students are coming from. But I'll see lotus flowers, I'll see Om signs, I'll see, doves, I'll see peacock feathers. And I'm not speaking to them about the awakening power, the chakras or anything, at all. We're just having these open-ended inquiries and creating, artwork that speaks to what they're feeling inside. So it's been the most incredible revelation, in terms of actually what happens when you receive an authentic awakening.
Yeah, it's so interesting to think of, you receive the shaktipat and then you almost have a continuous flow of that energy that's with you all the time. And of course, it's going to affect the people around you. I think, a lot of people have been to certain environments where it's kind of beyond words. You can't really intellectualize it, but there's just something that feels really like spiritually enticing here, you know, and synchronicities seem to be plentiful in these places. I've been to Fairfield, Iowa. It is where there's a college for transcendental meditation there. And I went there probably in October. So I spent a few days there. And I felt that I don't know that my feet ever touched the ground the whole time I was there. I feel like I was floating around everywhere. I was just like in this, all my conversations seemed exactly how they should have been. Um, I was just like everybody was looking me deeply in the eyes, and I was returning the favor. And there was just something about that environment that was really felt right, and it felt that I wasn't fighting against much. But they have twice a day, they have these two giant domes where everybody meditates twice a day. There's hundreds of people who do it. And so I think that has something, some sort of effect on it. Yeah, so it's interesting to be able to create these environments, you know. But so what do you what is your, do you have a daily meditation practice now? I mean, how do you integrate this knowledge and this wisdom that you have? Do you have an intentional practice? Do you take, like, if you're still getting lucid dreams, do you wake up in the morning and you journal them? Do you need to sit with them? I guess I'm curious about both your meditation practice and your integration of these kind of continuously happening shaktipat experiences.
Yeah, so what happened was pretty soon after getting shaktipat, and just as a way of trying to process, I started writing in a journal.
Yeah.
And I was really guided to do that. So I started journaling, I think, almost from way back, you know, when it first happened. And then specifically when I was dealing with the shadow and doing shadow work, you know, which again, for context, I'd never heard of shadow work. I had no clue what that was. I'd never done counseling as a kid or anything. So I was thrown into that when I was living in an ashram, when I went to the ashram in India that was related to Bhagavan Nityananda. My husband and I were invited there to be staff, to go on there as staff members.
How long, how long after the dream did you end up going over to the ashram?
That was, so I had the dream in 1989, and my husband and I went to the ashram in 2001, I think it was. So it was quite a long time. So I had this massive honeymoon period, so to speak, of these incredible experiences, you know, these great beings from every path, faith, and tradition. And then we went to the ashram, and I wasn't assuming anything, you know, but I kind of, I guess, hoped that those experiences would get bigger and broader and more kind of profound. And instead I was thrown into this really intense darkness. And, it kind of happened very organically, but it was so obvious and clear what I was being called to do. And what happened was, when I started to recognize, and just to kind of give the details, I was assigned to work with the logistics department, which would oversee programs. And there'd be a lot of people coming to programs, yoga and meditation programs, and so on and so forth. And so I was assigned to doing the logistics. There was a team of about 5 or 6 of us. And one morning, this young woman who had recently been assigned to the department asked me if I would help her set up something for a program that was happening. And I said, yes, absolutely. Let me just finish this document that I was writing up. I was, writing out the kind of the format for a program that was going to happen later in the week. I said, let me just say that, close it so I don't lose it. And she just wasn't happy with that response. And she kind of coiled up like a big cat, started, cussing and cursing at me and dropping F-bombs all over the place. And it just shook me to my core. I was so stunned, I couldn't believe it. And anyway, I stepped outside for a minute and leaned against the building. And I thought to myself, how is it possible that such an angry person could be in the ashram? And as that thought came up, this absolutely really intense kind of dark energy started to come up. And I had this sickening recognition that the angry person was me. She was just reflecting what I tried to sort of push down about my whole life. So I just saw everything. I just saw it clearly. But I didn't know what to do with that because I'd never, as I said, never done counseling, didn't have a clue what the shadow was or anything. But the next day I was helping out in the library. There was this incredible library at the ashram that had the most amazing books from every path. And I was kind of walking up and down and dusting, and this book literally bounced off the shelf. There was nobody else around. This book bounced off the shelf and landed at my feet. So I picked it up, and the book was by Mrs. Irena Tweedy, and it was called Chasm of Fire. Never heard of it. Didn't know Mrs. Irena Tweedy was. I had no idea. But anyway, I knew the book was for me. I knew there was a message. So I signed it out, took it back to my room. I opened it up, and there's a little kind of preface about her. And her backstory was that her husband died when she was in her early 50s or something like that. And she was so distraught. And she was kind of on a spiritual quest. And she found out about a Sufi master that lived in India. He was a Sufi guru. And so she made plans to go to visit him and spend time with him. And she thought, when she went, she wanted him to teach her or show her God. And she said, instead, he forced her to look at the deepest, darkest places within her, and it almost killed her. When I read that in the preface, I knew that was what was happening in terms of, what had just been revealed to me in that episode. And so then I just started doing self-inquiry and saying, okay, I'm ready to do the work. I will dive into this and do whatever it takes, but I need some guidance about how to do it. Didn't have a clue. So then I kept getting these kind of prompts, to do self-inquiry and to make a list of the people that I really admire and what their qualities were, make a list of the people that I really didn't like and write their negatives, and then see that, both of these aspects were also within me, and then look at why. For example, would I hold myself back in a situation or, try and sort of protect myself and, whatever the label the negative was speaking to, what why did I do that? So I really started doing this in-depth self-inquiry around the shadow, and that lasted some time. So, both of those things had been going on. I was writing all the beautiful dreams, then I get to the ashram, and then I'm detailing all of the shadow work. And I did that for quite a while, and that really, really helped then. And of course, at the time, I didn't know that I'd be writing books, and so I've often gone into the journals to be able to reacquaint myself with what I was going through at a certain period of time. So that's kind of the backstory. But to get to the point of what you're saying about meditation, is the main thing is that I had been a seeker for close to 30 years, and I was very ardent. I was very disciplined in doing the meditation practices, chanting and doing my japa and reading and doing all of these things. And then I think it was around 2016, I just got sick and tired of the whole seeking game. It wasn't like it wasn't this kind of position I was taking. It just became clear. I had this clear moment where I saw that seeking itself was the obstacle, and that seeking had to go. So I dropped everything. I dropped doing all the practices, all the meditation, everything, the chanting, everything. And the only thing that had any kind of resonance or appeal was to just go as deeply into the silence as I could possibly go within my own being. And that, happened throughout the day when I was teaching. So even before I'd say something, and it's still true today, before words are spoken, how deeply into the silence is it possible to go, into this place prior to, words arising?
What do you, another impossible question, what do you mean by going deeply into the silence? I wonder if the way you think of it is kind of the way that I think about it within my own relationship with silence. What do you mean by that?
What I mean is, first of all, connecting in obviously inside yourself rather than being kind of outer focused. And obviously when you're outer focused, what's happening is there's a narrative that's running all the time, right? Oh, look, the sky's, we're going to have a storm, or this is happening, or that's happening, or there's often even a story going on. There's a narrative going on when you're having a conversation with someone. So all of that, meditation practices help with all of that because they help you kind of refine the mind and let go of as many thoughts as you may have had prior to starting meditation. So that's kind of the backstory, right? But now what happens is, after a period of time, what happens is you become more inner focused. So your focus is inwards rather than outer directed, and then going into that silence within yourself prior to the movement of any thought. So what you'll notice is when a thought arises, let's say, you have a thought, oh my God, my hair looks a mess today, or I need to get a haircut or whatever. There's a place that prior to that thought arising that's silent. There's a space between thoughts. If you notice, especially when you're meditating, there's a space always between one thought arising and then subsiding and another thought arising and subsiding. And that space is silence itself, because the place from which thoughts arise and subside is the self, is source itself, is silence. Or whatever, however you want to describe that. So that was kind of, if you can call it a practice, that was what was happening. So I became very, I guess, familiar. I don't know how to put it, but that's the place that I go into and live from, even when I'm working.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. It's this space so much farther before the story. It's interesting that the story thing, when we have awakenings, we awaken to the fact that we even have had a story. We're so
Yes.
far into our story and living as our story, and we're the character in this thing, and there's so many layers of it. I mean, it takes just a long time to back up and even be acting from a place that's not of our continuous story. And it's, for a lot of us, I don't know how permanent it really is. I think it's a continuous effort in a lot of ways. Wow. Yeah. I feel like I have so many questions. You bring up so many amazing subjects. I wonder more. So what called you to write specifically books? Was there like one book that came very clearly, you had intuitive guidance, like, oh, I need to write about this specific subject, and then it just kept happening? Because you have, is it 9 books, or is there more than 9?
I have 6 books, and then I have 3 guided journals. So that's a really great question, because let me just say, I had absolutely no interest, intention, or goal of ever being a writer. I'd always loved writing as a kid, and I used to do pretty well at high school and so forth, and I passed exams in English literature and language and all of that. But that wasn't part of my sort of goal. Not that I had a goal, so to speak. But what happened was in let me get it right, in 2007, I had a lucid dream with a great being, with a master yogi. And she just kind of walked up to me and she said, "When are you writing the book?" And I said to her, "What am I supposed to write about?" And she just looks at me as if to say, "Come on, don't be such a..."
Yeah.
And then she just turns around on her heels and she starts walking away. And then she looks over her shoulder, and it was just this throwaway comment. And she looks at me and she says, "It's important to understand your own journey."
Wow.
And then she walks off. So I wake up from that dream. I'm lying in bed the next morning, and I'm thinking, because she asked me, I would absolutely do it, But I said this kind of prayer out loud, and I said, there's absolutely no way I'm going to write a book if it comes from ego. I don't want anything to do with it. It has to flow. It has to be given. Otherwise, it's not happening. And then I just went about my day and just forgot all about it. And but I think it was about 3 weeks later, my husband and I we were doing a house sit. We were invited to look after this beautiful house overlooking the ocean on Grand Bahama Island. And we were taking care of this dog, this old dog, beautiful old dog. And so I took the dog out for a walk early one morning, came back, made some coffee, sat on the patio, and I'm just looking over the palm fronds, looking at the ocean. And then all of a sudden I start hearing this book, or the words, let's just say, being spoken. And so I just grabbed a pen and a piece of paper and started writing everything down. And that's how the book was given. It was like I was hearing it. It was being downloaded from the Supreme Self or Source itself. And so I just wrote everything down, and then I thought, okay, what do I do now? I didn't have a clue. And as these things often happen, I had a friend who, I'd done a reading with him a couple of times, soul purpose readings and so on. And then he wrote back and said, I keep having this idea that you should write a book. And if you're looking at writing a book, you should maybe look at Smashwords, because it's a platform. You can upload books, it's for independent publishers and it's easy to use. And so he kind of sent me all the details without me having to even research it. And from there on, that started the whole thing. And that was really how every single one of the books was kind of birthed, so to speak.
Do you see, how has this changed your perspective on synchronicity? Is synchronicity, is that a big word in your experience? As in, like, you get this little idea and you don't exactly know how it's going to happen or play itself out, but you trust that it will. And then suddenly a person calls you and they have the thing you've been thinking about, or you run into someone and they're like, yeah, here's this exact, to me, that seems like synchronicity. Do you notice that, since your initial big lucid dream awakening in 89, or maybe it was before, do you notice that synchronicity plays a huge role in your life now? Or how do you see the word synchronicity, I suppose?
I wouldn't say it's any bigger than it was when I was really, really young, because I was always living in that way and from that space. Because I would hear things, or I'd have a prompt to do something, and then it would show up. So I really always believed that and knew that that was authentic. One story I do tell is, I had a difficult upbringing, because there was, 6 kids in a small house, with parents that weren't making much money, and it was very noisy. It was really hard to study, and I was having to take care of my brothers and sisters because I was the second oldest. And so it was really, really hard. And I failed 2 of my exams. I needed to, we were doing GCSEs, General Certificate in Secondary Education. I needed to pass 6 of those in order to go on to more advanced courses, similar to AP, advanced level courses. I failed 2 of those, and I just thought, that's it. I can't go to college. And I knew I'd always wanted to be a teacher from very young. I knew that was what I was going to do. So anyway, I failed because I couldn't, it was an impossible environment to study in. But one day I went to school after I got the results, feeling very depressed. And I was just sitting in the student lounge, and I just got this message straight away: go and speak to the English teacher or the professor or whoever it was. And see if you can do your retakes at the same time you're doing the advanced courses. It hadn't even occurred to me to do that. So I didn't even question it. I just stood up, went and spoke to the professor. He said, of course you can do it. Let's sign you up. Let's get it. You can do it. Do your retakes. And so I did. And thankfully I passed those. But, if I hadn't heard that prompt, or if I hadn't believed in kind of the authenticity of that prompt, I would never have been, been able to go to college. So that's always been with me. And I know synchronicity, that the term itself, has a certain connotation, flavor, and meaning, and so on and so forth. But for me, it's always about connecting in with grace and being open to receive these messages. And then, of course, when we receive these messages from source itself, or the mystery, or whatever you want to call it, then it cannot help but manifest in the outer. Because, what happens in the outer is a manifestation of your response to what you've been given. And so, of course, this magic, it's a very sort of magical, fluid, expansive way of living. Once you get the small I or the mind out of the way, which would tend to analyze, constrain, run it by 10 other people before you take action, and all of those things. And I just have never done that. I just trust it so implicitly. I just move right into action, and then the outcomes speak for themselves.
Mm. Yeah, that's well said. I really like where you went with that. It's been an interesting thing. Have you ever heard of the book? There's a book called The Celestine Prophecies. Have you ever heard of that
Hmm.
book?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. I love like that kind of uh, input on synchronistic living, and just kind of like the magic of it all. And I think that I've found myself in various times of my life. I find myself in those pockets of, it's like just a non-doing action. It's just everything is kind of happening, and I'm meeting this person. And I had a few months back. It was actually right before I went to Fairfield, Iowa, where the transcendental meditation experience was happening. I was walking around. I was kind of just in my head about whatever, just overanalyzing, and just thinking a lot, really. I was trying to listen to a meditation lecture as I was walking. And I remember thinking, as I turned the corner at the end of this trail by my house, I remember thinking, like, geez, if God or whoever, if source or whatever is trying to show me signs, I wish they would be a little more clear. I think I was basically thinking to myself, I think I'm getting signs, but I'm unable to decipher them, or I'm getting in my way, or, whatever. I'm going on in this story in my head, turning this corner. And then within less than 60 seconds, I'm walking, and this guy, he like kind of leans over, and I took my AirPod out, and he's like, "Hey, do you have a second to talk about to talk about Jesus Christ, or to talk about the gospel or something?" And it was just so interesting. I was just thinking, oh, I wish I would have clear signs. If I could just have a more clear sign. And then I ended up, regardless of the context, I ended up just having a wonderful connection and discussion with this guy for like an hour. We just stood there and talked, and he was saying a lot of things that really resonated with what I was already thinking about. And then it kind of led to a couple weeks of me just feeling floaty and airy. So I don't know. I'm very fascinated. That's why I asked. I'm just very fascinated by these moments of kind of synchronistic living, and the fact that sometimes it feels that I'm not living uh, in alignment with that, and I don't notice until I fall into it again. I go, oh, okay, now I'm listening to that voice a little bit more than I have been these last few weeks, or whatever. So um, yeah, I suppose. So in your experience, when you talk to these people with awakenings, how different does your day-to-day lived experience seem to be than other people? Because it sounds like you have been kind of, you know, having a relationship with this intuitive path your whole life in some senses. But I imagine, on Talking True, you probably talk with plenty of people who didn't didn't have these sorts of experiences or ways of thinking until they had a sudden awakening, later in life, or, a lot of times trauma or pain is what brings us to these things, brings us to our knees, so to say. Um, so I don't know. How do you parse, I guess, your experience of having these gifts from a young age versus other people who have, sudden awakenings at their mid 20s or their 30s or 40s, or whatever. Um,
Yeah, I mean, it is different because, and remember that, 1989 is a long time ago. So I'm fairly well practiced in terms of integrating what happened and what I was given. Because as I said, it did ramp things up. But one of the great things about my experience is that I was always teaching. So I was always having, even if I had the most incredibly amazing lucid dreams with angels and initiations and all kinds of stuff happening, I'd still have to get up in the morning and go to work and to deal with whatever I was dealing with. So all of that has kept me very, very grounded and really able to use language that isn't woo woo and is natural. And there's a sort of a connecting point for people. And what I found with those guests that have come on the show is if they had, let's say they had a kundalini awakening 6 months ago or a year ago, whatever, then obviously it is still very fresh and very new, and everything can be a little bit like mind blowing, and they're not quite sure what to do with it, and they're not quite sure how to integrate it. And so I can create this safe space that allows them to be able to speak from their own direct experience, and then also be able to offer tangible support rather than something that's a little bit kind of woo woo or out there, because you still, unless you've been born into a very wealthy family, you don't ever have to work. You can sit under a palm tree, for example. We all have to be able to communicate and be in the world and live in a way that is authentic to our nature, and not get too kind of high in the clouds, which, as we know, is all about spiritual bypassing. And I've talked about that a few times too, where, there can be a tendency to like try and meditate everything away. And that works for a while, but it doesn't work long term.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether that answers the question, but yeah, I mean, I can really tell if somebody is, let's just say, fresh out of a kundalini awakening, for example, or it happened a long time ago, because there is a seasoning that happens.
Cool. Yeah. I'm glad you spoke to that, because I still have my ups and downs for sure. There's certain days where I feel very clear and I feel very I feel that I'm in the role of holding that space for other people in some senses. And then there's other days where I'm, as our mutual friend has said, Brett Spirit, I too am very much in process. I had my initial awakening 6-7 years ago. And now I have so much love for, I watch, my YouTube algorithm will spit me out my kundalini awakening experience, and it's someone just talking for 15 minutes, and I understand what they're saying entirely, but I also understand that if someone saw this who isn't familiar with the terms or awakening or whatever, they might be like, well, what is going on with this person? They're saying a lot of pretty intense stuff, but I see it on the other side of, I entirely understand what you're going through. You're in some time, you're probably going to alter the way you say these sorts of things, the way that you communicate with the world, because it's just such an intense, the self is just completely stripped away, and it's your ground of where you have acted from and where you have basically where you exist from is just like the bottom drops out in a sense, and you kind of have to create a new way of perceiving the world. And sometimes it can be very intense, and it can be very, woo woo is a perfect word for it. So there's a lot of integration that takes place. Do you see the world of? I look at guys like Brett Spirit and things that you're doing, where you're offering space and you're holding space. Do you see a bigger version of this? Do you see, in the next 10 years, is it going to be a very normal part of a lot of people's conversations? Like, oh, you've had an awakening, and here's where this conversation takes place. Because now we have YouTube and podcasts, and they seem kind of like these, I don't know. They seem like they stand so far against and so far different than worlds of going to a counselor, going to a psychologist, learning about these things in school, reading, Buddhist texts in school or whatever it is. There's kind of this whole new thing forming with podcasts and YouTube and social media. Um, I don't know. I guess as I'm rambling on here, I apologize to form a question. I guess where do you see in the next 10 years or so the work that you're doing? Do you see it continuing to kind of ripple out? Do you see more people sprouting up as teachers? Do you see more people awakening in coming to YouTube and podcasts for answers? I suppose I would like to pick your brain on that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think there's definitely a refining that's been happening because, again, compared to what the world was like when I first had my awakening, or when I was really young, when I was looking for kind of answers and so on and so forth, you couldn't find it very much of anything. And now, of course, there's so much on YouTube. But one of the problems that I see is there are so many people presenting as, kundalini experts or teachers or gurus that don't necessarily have the grounding or the experience or the lineage. One of the things that I know that Bhagavad Nityananda of Ganeshpuri always has said is that there needs to be a lineage. So if you have a teacher that is claiming to be able to give shaktipat, kundalini awakening, I would just question, who is your teacher and who is your teacher's teacher? Because it's important to have that grounding and that kind of lineage behind a person if you're going to be working with them. So there's that you have to kind of watch out for, and just make sure that the person that you're working with, if you're opting to work with somebody, that it's authentic and they're not just speaking about something they've read in a book, because I do see some of that online. So there's all of that. And I would say too, Kundalini awakenings does not then mean that you throw out, psychotherapy or kind of orthodox counseling, because there's a place for that too. And if you can find somebody who's had their own awakening, that's even better. Or at least find somebody who's sympathetic to understanding the place that you're coming from. So it's not that they're, sort of mutually exclusive. They're not. But I think there's definitely an upsurge in the numbers of people that are going through their own awakenings, whether they call it a Kundalini awakening or a Christ consciousness awakening or whatever the term is. It's essentially the same thing. And there is a disintegration. A lot of people think an awakening will make them a more improved version of who they already think they are. And it's the direct opposite, because it's a really destructive process. As you said, it kind of takes the ground away from under your feet. And you are left in this space of recognizing you're not the story, but kind of being able to integrate and really, understand who you are beyond the story does take time. And you also are thrown into this space of having to become comfortable with the not knowing. Because, with the Western mindset, we're always taught through formal education and university and whatever, and training at work, whatever we're doing, we're always taught to present as if we know. We know what the story is. We know who we are. We know what our background is. We know about our training. And spiritual awakening is the direct opposite of that. It's about the recognition that really you don't know anything. And it's source itself that informs or speaks to whatever you need to know in any given moment. And of course, again, I'm not discounting formal training or university degrees, masters, PhDs, or whatever. All of that has its place, but it has its place with respect to the relative. And the relative, it is speaking to the story of who you are. We have to have our education degrees and all of that with respect to the presenting in the world and, finding jobs and all of those things. But again, all of that is relative to the story, and the truth of who you are, your true nature, is prior to the story. And It is infinite, and it's supremely intelligent. So the more you trust that and lean into the not knowing, the more you're able to receive these gifts of synchronicity, these gifts of insight, these intuitive messages, and kind of manifestations that appear in your life.
Yeah, yeah. Becoming more in tune with voices that are trying to speak to you. Do you have psychedelics played a role in your in your journey at all?
No, I
No.
just never felt any interest, or there was never any need for me to try psychedelics because I was always having a psychedelic.
Yeah, sounds like it. Yeah. 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 I ask I ask because I always Terrence McKenna Alan Watts. I mean, all these philosophers of sorts would basically kind of talk about the way of being a conscious participant in this whole thing here is having a self-dropping away experience, and a lot of times that is psychedelics. That's look at guys like Ram Dass. That was kind of his opening into being who we all know him to be now. Was having a psychedelic experience and realizing I'm not my body, I'm not my job, I'm not these things, and those implications just started this domino effect of what everybody knows of Ram Dass today. And so I wonder if we come from a lineage of ritual experiences that would intentionally challenge the self or show us that we are at least more than the self, and then having some sort of integration process. I read this book, The Eleusinian Mysteries, and they talk about all these rituals, and people would take these journeys and they would drink this ayahuasca type medicine, and they would have a death themselves, and then come out on the other side, you're a different person. I just think it's so fascinating to think that regardless of the initial kind of switch flipping or dream that happens or psychedelic experience or whatever the initial thing is, we now have YouTube and podcasts and these people talking from their own truth as kind of guiding hands towards like leading us back into ourselves. I just find it so fascinating that I can be, mowing my lawn with headphones in, listening to a spiritual teacher and have genuine, like profound experiences where I need to like pause mowing the lawn because I'm experiencing this thing that has just, like I said, had the bottom drop out. And so it's just, whereas we used to maybe we would have to go to the Tibetan mountains or something like that to experience these profound teachings. Now we can listen to people on your podcast. We can listen to your story and go, whoa, like this experience is truly possible. And it's just so altering. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And it's just so readily available now. I mean, in the sort of the yogic tradition, years ago, what would happen is you'd spend a long time trying to locate an authentic Siddha master, a shaktipat guru. And then you'd have to travel there, usually to some remote place in India, and ask if you could study with him or her. And usually the period of studying, with them could be years before they even give you shaktipat. And so, of course, all of that's completely changed now because everything is just so readily available and so kind of instantaneous. If you're open to it and if you're ready to receive it, of course, and if you're also ready to receive the responsibility that goes with this transmission, because there's obviously this work to be done. You have to do the work on the psyche and the shadow so that you don't become imbalanced. And then you have to be ready to do the practices because, especially in the beginning, there's always the practices that you're kind of guided to do, whether it's meditation, chanting, japa, mental repetition of prayers, and so on and so forth. So there's a weight to that. It's not like you're given this transmission and then your life becomes amazing and everything just goes well for you. Which is the fantasy, it's that is a big fantasy. Oh, I'll suddenly be able to sort of do whatever or I've always wanted to do and become famous or get rich or whatever.
Yeah.
And it doesn't work. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah. Yeah. It will destroy your illusions pretty quickly. It's like, yeah, you're gifted a bunch of work you need to get on the way with. Like, here's the thing you should start. You have a big to-do list that is birthed. That's for certain. I would love to talk a little bit more about your podcast. I would love to just kind of feel, just as a fellow podcaster, what has your podcast been teaching you? What are you? Has there been anything shocking? Has there even your guests? Like, how do you link up with your guests? What's the magic behind being a podcast host look like for you?
Well, again, I had no desire to be a podcast host. It wasn't on my list of things at all. But what happened was let me think, during the pandemic, was it 2020? We were on very severe lockdown in the Bahamas. I mean, it was really severe. We could not leave our houses. We were on lockdown for months. It's just ridiculous. To even go to the food store, we could only go on certain days of the week, according to the first letter of your surname. And, it was really intense. However, what happened was a friend of mine reached out and she said that she was creating a podcast and she wanted to run retreats via YouTube. And I was one of the first guests that she invited. And she said, so it'll be live and I would love you to present maybe something on lucid dreaming or, developing your intuition or something like that. And so I just thought, oh, I don't know how comfortable I am with that. Even though I'd written books, I'm a teacher and all of those things, I wasn't so sure about getting online and doing this. Because, I'm still contemplative and quiet. But what happened was I said, let me get back to you. So I went to my altar space, my puja, and I did puja, I did my prayer work and, and invoked the great beings that I work with, Nityananda, and said, I've been invited. Do I do this? And the response was, yes, we need your help. And so that was it. I just wrote back and said, yes, I'll do it. And I thought, oh, it'll be a one-off, I'll do one episode and that'll be it. Well, it was so popular. I ended up doing, I think it was 100 presentations or something like that, interviews and this and that and the other on the Buddhist biohacker, through retreats and so on. I found out I really loved it. And then I was invited onto other shows and interviewed endless times. And then I got this hit. You should create your own YouTube channel and you should interview people who've had their own awakenings. So I didn't know what the heck I'm doing. I never would have got into it. So I just, figured it out, got it started. And, last year I was interviewing authors from diverse backgrounds and genres, and I just wasn't feeling it. And then I got this message. It was like, that was like a little practice run. And okay, now interview people who've had near-death experiences, mystical experiences, awakenings, and people who are healers and stuff like that. So there's been a big learning curve in terms of getting all of that set up and how to sort of create an episode so that it has as many views as would make it kind of worth your while, so to speak. So I didn't know anything about tagging and I had to making sure that the title of the video is the same as the title, all of those things. I kind of figured out as I've gone along. But I've really, really enjoyed it because it's given me an opportunity to be able to host and support people to get their word out. So it's really about my guests. It's not about me at all. It's about them shining light, sharing who they are, letting people find them, and just having these great in-depth conversations. And so that will continue for as long as I'm told to continue. And when I'm told close it down, I'll just close it down. And that's how it goes.
Yeah, well, it's a really cool thing. I mean, from what I've absorbed of your podcast so far, I feel like holding space is something you beautifully do. I mean, you really just hold space for someone to just express themselves and feel incredibly comfortable sharing their story. Because like I said, it's stuff is so strange. You know, it's really hard to we're talking in this kind of woo woo space, and we're trying to make sense of like this thing actually happened to me, and I'm trying to parse through it. And you know, it's you don't have these sorts of conversations just you know at the gas station or you know at work. You know, there's just not the sorts of subjects that pop up at Christmas dinner all the time. So being able to have a space to discuss them freely and kind of explore what we think and what we've learned, and just parse our different knowledge and experience onto one another is just a really beautiful thing. They've become really this type of conversation. People who have had near death experiences, people who have had sudden awakenings, become like one of my favorite things to listen to. They bring me to such a place that my mind is always trying to hang out in all the time anyway. And so just to hear other people expressing their truths, I'm like, okay, I'm not so crazy. Like I have these things going on, and it's just a place of acceptance. I spent a lot of time listening to Buddha at the Gas Pump with Rick Archer.
Yes.
I just waiting to see your name on there. I feel like you would be a fantastic guest. I think you and Rick would have a wonderful conversation. You've heard of that one? You've heard of Buddha at the Gas Pump?
Yes, I have. But I think the way it works is people suggest to him who to have on, and then he says yes or no is the way it works. But yeah, I like his show. I think it's really nice. And obviously, I don't resonate with everybody, but a lot of the guests, it's just really great listening to what they have to say. You know, and with respect to what you were saying about it all feeling a bit woo-woo, I know Brent says the same thing, you know, and I think that's why he created his show. But for me, this is really normal. It's natural. It's the way I live. And I did go through a period in the late 80s, early 90s where I was desperate to talk to other people and find other people and find, you know, and now not so much, because I guess I don't need that level of support in the same way. You know what I mean? I guess is what's happening. But even all of that said, I do love to create this safe space for people to be able to speak their truth and to share it, because I know what it's like to feel lonely or alienated, because that was certainly how I felt as a kid. It was just very painful. And I remember when I first wanted to learn how to, you know, do hatha yoga, I could only find one book. There was only one book available in this bookstore in the town that I lived. And to me, that was like gold. So, yeah. So I'm just so happy that everything's just so out in the open now, as opposed to how it used to be.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, more of us can take our, you know, actual lived experience and find others who have had similar experience, and kind of make some sense of it, and kind of make a little bit of progress into integrating it. You know, because it's I think a lot of people have somewhat of mystical experiences, but we don't know what to do with it, and it almost becomes, you know, without the integration, without reading a couple books, listening to other people who have had similar experiences. I mean, in just a few months, you go like, did even happen? Did that crazy
Yeah.
thing that was so important to me for multiple weeks, like, was that even a true experience? You know? And so, yeah, I totally agree. I just think it's so beautiful that we have so many different resources forming now to where we can talk about things like subtle body without it feeling like it's an attack on a materialistic view of the world. You know, I think it's all paradoxically, it's all kind of existing, and we need to be able to I suppose express ourselves and talk about our own truth, and meet other people who are along the same path. I do want to I was thinking about the fact that you've written, you know, 6 books and then 3 let's say 9 books. Do you, if you had all your books in front of you and you're kind of taking a step back, do you have like a general consensus of the message that you're, I mean, I guess like what is ultimately your message? Another kind of impossible question for you, but what do you think is the through line between all of your books and in your podcast and in your work? Like what is really trying to be expressed, do you think, if
Well,
anything?
yeah, well, with respect to the books, it's the first book was really detailing the story of awakening and what that was like. And I know people that have read that have, got a lot of benefit from it because it helps them support their own kind of process especially through a kundalini awakening. And all the way through, the main message is to trust yourself, trust your inner knowing, trust your inner guidance, listen to what you're hearing inside. Lean into that, lean into the not knowing. So, everything I've shared in the other books, the first one, An Awakened Life, A Journey of Transformation, is, as I said, about the awakening. And then the other books detail lucid dreaming and, the importance of listening to dream messages and being present in your life. And then with the shadow work books, what is the shadow? What does that look like? How does it show up in your life? How can you work with it? How can you mine the gold that is at the heart and the depth of the darkness within you? Because there's always a creative component that comes out of this, the unearthing of the shadow and the integration of the shadow. So again, it's really all about, having the courage to go inside yourself and to meet and greet what you find there and to trust it, trust the voice of it, even if it's uncomfortable and it's painful and it's a message you do not want to really look at or hear. There's great gold and treasure in what you find within your own being, rather than looking outside yourself.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. We have this knack for wanting to explore what's out there in the cosmos and the galaxy and how far can we physically go? And that's all amazing. That's all so fascinating. But yeah, if you just turn that on itself, I mean, there's an infinite exploration inside too, and it's the most fascinating. I spend a lot of my time as some sort of musician, poet. Spend a lot of my time creating, and that's what one of my favorite things to do is just kind of get lost on the inward journey and exploring myself and really figure out what I think. And I stub my toe internally too. I come across things. I'm like, oh, I didn't mean to uncover that. Do I have time to
Yes.
deal with this thing right now? So that's part of the whole awakening journey. What do you
Yeah.
go ahead, go ahead.
No, I was going to say yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Uh, what do you have? So awakening as a whole, whether it's considered a kundalini awakening or just a general broad brushstroke of awakening. I guess what do you have to say to people who are awakening suddenly? People who, regardless of how they got there, regardless of where they're at with it at this moment. I guess do you have a message or maybe even a little advice to people who are waking up currently?
Yeah, I mean, one of the most helpful things that certainly was very beneficial for me was having a journal. Because in those moments where it felt overwhelming or I wasn't quite sure what was happening or whatever, I would write it. I'd write the question, what's going on or something, I'd write something in my journal and then do stream of consciousness writing around that. And another little kind of thing that really helped, I was inspired, I got this little download to, in those moments when I felt, down or depressed or worried or whatever about what was going on. I would write at the title, where am I in my life right now, at the top of the journal page. And then the first image that comes to mind, I'd draw it. And then I do stream of consciousness writing around what I was being shown. And it was always so incredibly profound in terms of, the message, the underlying message of all of that. And even looking back now, into my journals years and years ago. It's just like, holy moly, that was just so on point. And the reason it's really effective is because by drawing the image, even if you can't draw and it's just like crappy stickman drawing or whatever, because you're going straight into the imagery, you're bypassing the critical mind. And then from that image, you can start doing stream of consciousness writing. And then you can give it a title as if it was a movie or a book. And then that speaks to the place where you feel like you're stuck, or you need some insight, or you need an answer to something. And it's just a great little exercise, and it just gives you this, tremendous insight in terms of what's happening and where you are.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I have in my own journey, I've found writing and journaling, whether it's some artistic thing that I think I might share on the other side, or if it's just for me. Sometimes I'll write and I'll just, you get into one of those little flow states for a few minutes or an hour, whatever it might be. Sometimes you take a step back and you reread what you wrote and you go, whoa, I didn't know I thought that. I didn't know that I was really even experiencing that. And so, yeah, I agree with you. I like that. It really gives us a lot of perspective on what's really going on. I like to say my thoughts about what's going on, they get stuck in my head cavity and they just bounce around in here sometimes. And sometimes I just need a way to get them out, to where I can really dissect them and inspect them and then make some sort of actionable move on the other side. So
yes,
very helpful.
yeah, it's very simple, that exercise. Where am I in my life right now? It's really easy.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, cool. Well, we are getting up here in time. I definitely want to send. We're gonna have some links down below where we can find more of your work. What do you have on the horizon though? What do you have coming up? Do you have some more guest plans? Are you writing any books right now? What do you have going on coming up?
Yeah, so I've got a long list of guests, and now I'm getting emails from people who've seen me on Threads or wherever. They've seen me on YouTube and asking if they can come onto the show. So that's really nice. So I've got that will go on for as long as I said, I keep getting the message to do it. And then I'm currently in the middle of starting another book. I'm not clear where I'm going with that yet, so I won't go too much into the details of it, and then I'm always doing intuitive artwork. I have a whole, I have a whole platform on Fine Art America with my intuitive art, and I teach programs as well on how to create intuitive art, and again, bypassing the critical mind and connecting with the self. And then still teaching, still working full time. So I have a full plate.
Yeah, sounds like
a lot of people think I just sit under a palm tree and meditate all day. And that's why I'm so connected. It's the absolute opposite. Believe me, it's this. And they say, well, I'm working part time and I've got, a couple of kids or whatever, and I don't have the time you have. And I'm like, okay, really?
Yeah, you're like, I didn't realize I had all this free time. It doesn't seem like it, but whatever you say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I always say, listen, if I can connect in with the self and do the practices, given my schedule, then you can too. It doesn't have to be a 3-hour seated practice every day. When you're peeling potatoes or cleaning the kitchen or whatever you're doing at home, you can say your prayers, repeat your mantra, or go into the silence within your being. That is a spiritual practice. It doesn't have to be formal, because that's where that trips a lot of people up. I don't have the time, Okay, well, I'm sure you clean. I'm sure you cook for yourself. I'm sure you go to the grocery, store. I'm sure you drive. While you're driving, just see how deeply you can go into the silence. You don't have to zone out and close your eyes when you're driving, but just see if you can go into that space and watch the movement of the mind rather than being lost in the movement of the mind. So all of these things are accessible.
I like to say some form of, what you do is what you always do. When I first started meditating, I was so obsessed with like meditation. I was still trying to understand what that meant and what that meant to me. And so I remember specifically, I would travel a lot for work, and I would get through airport security and I would find a good place to sit. I'd get there early and I'm like, all right, I'm sitting crisscross applesauce with my eyes closed, and like I was like performing meditation in a way.
Yes. Yes.
But now it's you know, just for recent example, you know, learning transcendental meditation has kind of taken over, you know, so I have this continuous mantra, and now it's just a process of me remembering and then going, oh yeah, and then the mantra's always going. It's not like I'm
Yes.
intentionally now doing the mantra. It's, oh yeah, I remembered that at this moment I could tune into the mantra that is continuously moving within me, you know. And so yeah, totally, I entirely resonate with that, you know. It's
Mhm. Yes.
it's not so much of a, let me pencil into my schedule at exactly 10:15 a.m. I will be sitting in this spot. You know, there's times where you need that, and there's times where that's part of what it is. But ideally, I think our spiritual practice becomes a 24/7 tuning frequency that we kind of just have access to in a wonderful way. So
Yes.
yeah.
Exactly. Simple.
Yeah, simple. Okay, Julie. Well, thank you so much for your time. I'm so grateful for this. Thank you for rolling with the punches of my rambling questions and providing space for me to kind of just pick your brain and explore more of your work. I'm really looking forward to exploring more. I want to grab a couple of your books and check those out. I'm going to continue listening to your podcast, and just thank you so much for all the work that you put in and everything you do. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. This has been really great. I just love these conversations that just kind of just flow, you know? It's great. I love it.
Great. Perfect. All right, everybody. Well, listeners, check out Julie's stuff. We have some links down below. And if you haven't drank any water today, drink some water. If you haven't stopped for a second to love yourself, love yourselves. Explore more of Julie's stuff, and we'll see you guys next episode. Thank you, Julie. We'll be in touch.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.